This is going to be an interesting one. I'm going to try and move around a bit, but I'm going to be pressing keys a lot because it's command line, and I haven't got another key. Apparently one key is enough, so we can't have multiples like we've got with Todd's. So it won't be quite as slick as that, just to set expectation. Kind of wishing I went first, really, given how slick that performance was. Let's do it. So I'm going to talk to you about the Salesforce command line interface. Does anyone use the Salesforce command line interface? Okay, cool. Not that many. That's good. So, okay, first off about me, if anyone doesn't know, CTO of BrightGen, hosting tonight, Salesforce MVP, Certified Technical Architect. Most people know that kind of thing. What not everyone knows is that I grew up in the command line. I was born into the command line and I grew up in it. So a lot of people are probably looking at things like the Salesforce CLI and think, I don't really trust this, don't really know how it works, not really sure what it's doing. So that was, for me, that's GUIs. I don't trust GUIs because when it's a command line, I can see what it's doing. I can see all the commands that are being executed. When it's a GUI, anything could be going on under the hood. So I've always been a bit mistrustful of them, so it's quite nice for me that we're back into command line world where I can see everything that's going on. Most of the work I do with Git, I do from the command line. So for those of you who use source tree, imagine what that's like. So these are the systems that I grew up with. Learned to program at college on a Prime mini computer. Used a VAX mini computer, VMS operating system, HP UX Unix, and then AIX Unix. I think it was about AIX Unix 3 before we had the concept of having a desktop system that actually was a computer on your desktop. Prior to that, we had one of these. Anyone remember these? So you know on your computer you've got an application called Terminal, which you can open up and get the command line. So that is a terminal. So the command you open up, we had one of those. That used to sit on my desk. We had one of those to work with, and there was a cable that went out the back into the real computer. One terminal each. That was it. After a couple of years, we got these boxes that you could put on your desk that gave you 4 of these terminals. Quadruple productivity overnight. Absolutely unbelievable. So the Salesforce CLI. So this is the sfdx executable, even though they're trying to rebrand it as CLI now because it came out of SalesforceDX. So everyone's still going to call it sfdx, SalesforceDX for a long, long time, I'd imagine. So I always use those interchangeably. It requires a local installation, so this isn't going to be for your users. This is very much for your admins and devs. As I say, it's part of SalesforceDX. The idea is it's one tool to rule them all. Eventually, you'll be able to do everything you need to do. And I was just saying to someone earlier on, I don't think I've used a tool for the kind of things that you can do with the CLI since outside of the CLI since probably last September. So I haven't used anything different to that, really. So that's what most people think of with a multi-tool. So I don't think Salesforce CLI is a multi-tool in that respect because, generally speaking, this is all a bit crap. It's like a really crap hammer. It's not a very good set of pliers. If you don't even know if there's a screwdriver on there, there's a screwdriver on there. As soon as you use that, you'll strip the screw or you'll strip the head. It'll be absolutely useless. Everything will be wobbling. There's not that kind of multi-tool. It's more this kind of thing. That everything you want to do, there's a drawer with a box of appropriate, drop-forged tools, the right things. It's also extensible. So you can end up with plumbing all your own cabinets into there's SalesforceDX and there's your own personal extensions. I haven't played around with that aspect of it yet, but Wade Wegner's done some kind of nice extensions. So this is the thing I really like about this compared to a lot of other tools I've used. The authorization, because it works on OAuth. So basically, I log in once, I authorize that org through Salesforce CLI, and then the CLI manages all the tokens, and effectively I can just specify a -u option to any command that I give it, and that knows about my previous login that I've authorized. Flip side to this, anybody gets on my machine, all they need to know is some of my usernames, and they're into every Salesforce org that I have access to. So if you use this on production systems, you may want to think about logging out afterwards, rather than just logging in. So what I'm going to do with all of these is jump out and try and demo what's happening. So there's my authorization. I run sfdx false auth web login, and what that does is that fires up a browser which I can log in. I'm not going to do it on this particular one. This is kind of the ugliest bit of it because what will happen, let's record the full screen. Click that. That's probably not going to work as well as we'd hoped, just to let the video recorder know there. Yeah, so what the ugliest bit of this was that this will then take me into the org, and I'm logged in at that point in time. And I have to remember to go back to the command line and check that it's happy with my login. That's kind of the slightly ugly thing, because what normally happens is I end up in the org, and I think, oh, I need to do something while I'm here. I'll go off and I'll forget all about the fact I'm just supposed to be authorised in the org. But having authorised the org, so I can then do this command, which is basically force org open, and what that does is that pops up and I'm straight in there. No confirmation codes, no passwords, no nothing. Straight into that org as a system administrator. As I say, think about this if you're going to leave that kind of information on the file system. Probably don't want to do this in any production system, or indeed any system where you have any real customer data on it. But that's kind of one of the really cool things in terms of if you're managing a lot of developer editions. It really is quite nice to use that. Right, if I go back to presenting. So that's kind of the basic housekeeping stuff. The thing I mainly use the CLI for is deployment. I haven't used anything like Ant for years. I used to use the Force CLI, which is kind of quite nice, but not as nice as SalesforceDX. So if you're doing deployment, if you've read any of the SalesforceDX information, it will talk about scratch orgs and how it can figure out the differences between the local file system and the org. All that's awesome. None of that works in the metadata API side of things. That's purely for scratch orgs. So if you're dealing with it on metadata, which is what I'm talking about today, then you still need to have your structured source folder, so the old on-file system source folder we used to, if you ever used a Maven's Mate or Force.com IDE, and then a manifest, a package.xml that lists all of the things that are going to be part of that deployment. And then based on that, I can deploy to any of the orgs that I previously authenticated. So I've got two ways of doing this. I can specify a -W option, which basically says I want to wait for the completion. I'll give it up to 2 minutes, but I want you to take care of polling, etc. I want you to come back and tell me when it's done. Or I can take care of the polling myself, so I can just do the deployment, tell it not to wait, but it's up to me to poll. I tend to use this most of the time because if I'm deploying 7,000 components and it fails on the 50th, I don't really want to wait another 25 minutes for all those to finish. And doubly so if I'm planning on running tests or anything like that as part of my deployment. So that means I can do something with it. So as we jump out again, I try and remember what I named all these things. So this is my deployment, which is going to sit and wait. So as you see, I then get a status, and the sfdx takes care of it itself, sleeps for 5 seconds, 10 seconds, something like that. Polls, you can see the components deployed going up. It's a sort of structured layout. It's not particularly machine friendly, but it sends me that kind of information. Now it's come back and said it succeeded, and that's all good. So I can then, if I want to wait for it myself, if I want to poll myself, then I fire off that, and that will come back to me, tell me it's queued, gives me a job ID. So now that I have the job ID, I can run my report script, which purely just executes a single command with the ID of that job, and that will come back and tell me how it's going on. Okay, so in that particular case it succeeded, finished in 7,000 milliseconds, and again the same information, but it hasn't pushed it to me. It's given me control back straight away, and then it's up to me to go and find out more about what's going on with that. So that's the way that I tend to use that, because I can take action as soon as I get any kind of an issue. You can also, which is really nice, you can run tests. So you can do that after you've executed your deployment. If it was successful, I can then run, you can run any of the tests that you're used to running when you're doing any kind of deployment. They're typically the ones that I use. It's either running all the local tests in my namespace, so just run the whole lot because I'm deploying the whole lot. I want to make sure how everything's going, or I'm interested in a specific test because I've done something to improve the coverage or something like that. So if I jump out and demo that again, if I could type, I seem to have inherited Todd's disease. So if I do all tests, so again I've given it a -W2, so I've told it I'm quite happy to wait until it's completed the test. Those actually ran really quickly. If I scroll up a little bit, you can see here's my test results. They all passed. It tells me how long they ran for. So I get a test summary which says there were 9 ran, 9 passed, yada yada yada. It gives me some additional information. And then I can also
show you test coverage.
1 second, my man. If I run a single, so this is going to run a single test, which it tells me to run this report command. However, if I run that report command, so this is one where I decided not to wait. So this is kind of what's slightly weird about the CLI. Sometimes it will say run this, other times it will say run this with these parameters. Sometimes if you give it a -w, it will wait. Sometimes if you don't specify the -w, it won't wait. So it's not quite consistent yet, although they are improving it. So if I paste that in now, so if I do -c, then that asks it to get the code coverage. So now I can see the percentage coverage and the uncovered lines of any particular test that I ran. So regardless of which test I run, this will give me the code coverage for the entire code base. So for anyone that's tried to do that programmatically before and it's involved hitting the REST API and that kind of thing, that's actually quite a nice feature. Saves quite a bit of time. You can also retrieve metadata. Now, has anyone used the Force CLI, the kind of forerunner to this, which is more of a community thing? Yeah, no, you're supposed to be anybody else? No, it was just us. It was all happening in BrightGen. So the Force CLI had this great feature called Force Export. And export basically took the kind of the 99% of metadata that everyone cared about and exported the whole thing down to the local file system, basically every Aura component, every Apex class, and loads of other bits and pieces. They haven't got that in SFDX, sorry, in Salesforce CLI just yet. So the way you retrieve metadata is you still have to give it a package.xml. So effectively you have to tell it what metadata you want to retrieve, which I don't think is quite as good myself. I know there is a feature request to add that in, but I don't seem to have any way of finding out the details of that. So if I do retrieve, so in my package.xml, if you remember, I had, I think, Aura classes. So what's happened here. That's done the retrieval, told you it was in progress. It's succeeded, but now it's written a zip file as well. So it always comes out in a zip file, unpackaged.zip, because of the way I've done the retrieval, using just a straightforward manifest file. And then if I expand that up, you can see that it's got my flexi pages, and it's also got the permission set that I was interested in. Also brings me back a package.xml containing all the stuff that I asked you to get on the package.xml, because apparently you can never have too many package.xmls in this world.
That -r parameter, is that telling it where to retrieve it to?
Yes, -r dot is where I want to deposit the zip file, so I could tell it to go somewhere else if I so desired. On back one. So again, I showed the. So I mentioned that in most of these you've got the wait for complete concept. This one is slightly different. So if I run my wait for complete version of this, okay, so that tells me it didn't complete, which it won't because it's got to pull down a few bits and pieces. And if I then do run my report with this, what you see happens here, as part of the report, it's carried out this retrieve again. In all the others, I can keep running that report as many times as I like and it will give me the final status of it. In this case, I can't, because that's completed and it's sent to the zip file. It doesn't cache the zip file for any length of time. As soon as that's retrieved, that's done, that's dealt with, that's deleted. So then I suddenly get this invalid locator because the retrieve result has already been dealt with. So if I manage to screw that up in some way, shape or form, I have to go and get it again. I've got no way of retrieving that anew. You can also do destructive changes. I'm not going to do that because I don't want to destroy the stuff that's in there. But it's much the same as if you ever did destructive changes with Ant or the Force CLI. You need an empty package.xml because, bizarrely, a destructive change is actually a deployment of nothing with some information about what to kill. And then you need a file called destructivechanges.xml. It has to have that name, can live anywhere you like, but it has to have that name. And what this will do is this then specifies which things you want to delete. Which can be quite interesting. In terms of, sometimes you find that you can't actually do it all in a single file for whatever reason, even though you should be able to. Kind of weird dependencies hang around and you have to do it across multiple files. Best just to suck that up, I find, rather than trying to rail against it and find another way around it. And then you'd execute that command, force md API deploy -d destroy. -d destroy is my directory with these two files in it, and that will then go away and do its magic. Also, something to be aware of with destructive changes, my experience is that it doesn't really care if there's any dependencies on the things you're taking away. That will get discovered by the next lucky person that tries to use whatever it is. Yes, Rob?
When you do a destructive changes using the existing metadata tool, like labels make and all
right.
that fun stuff, if the object doesn't exist, you're trying to delete, you get a warning and it stops, and in your build XML, you put a ignore warnings equal true.
Yeah, you've got a similar parameter for that. I can't remember what it is off the top of my head, but you have that concept as well if you want to say just keep pressing on if I was partially successful last time.
Yeah,
okay. Yeah, so you've pretty much got everything you used to have in the others, just in a kind of more nicely packaged single tool. The other great thing about this is you're not stuck with just metadata, so you can retrieve data. So effectively you can execute a query and you can pull data down to your local file system. So in this case, in the demo, I'm going to pull down the contact information, if I can remember the script. That's the one. So minus Q, select ID, oh, it's gone a bit quickly, let's go back up to that. Select ID, first name, last name from contact. Give it my username, and it gives you back the ID, the first name, the last name. You can get various formats of this, but this is the kind of the most human readable.
single quote.
This is actually really picky. This is probably the pickiest command you can get into. Once you start getting into lengthy names and wanting to do multiples, you do have to jump through a few hoops. I would say that in terms of retrieving and updating metadata, unless it's something really simple, you probably wouldn't use this. You'd probably use something like a Jitterbit, or MuleSoft probably take loads of IO going forward. It's all right for just doing it's all right for doing an automated tweak. You know, there's something you want to do as part of that. It's not really great for much else on that at the moment.
Can you? Sorry. I was going to say, is it just SOCL?
It is just SOCL on that particular command. There could be other commands that allow you to do other things in data. I don't think there is anything else at the moment, but there's nothing to stop you creating your own, apart from the monster amount of code you have to try and understand. Thus far has been my experience.
Is it a SOCL?
I don't believe there's a SOCL. I haven't looked at it, but it's yeah. I don't recall coming across a SOCL. But you can also update data, if you've retrieved some. So this is kind of where it starts getting a bit unwieldy and seems unlikely you'd really use this if you were doing bulk data operations and the like. So you specify the S object type and the ID of the thing, and then some field equals value space separated string in quote marks. It just doesn't really feel like you'd be doing that if you were doing kind of proper extract, transform, load type of work. But
with the retrieve, can you specify like a download output format?
Yeah, you can pull it down as
or
JSON, CSV, and human readable. Pretty much all the time you can pull stuff down as JSON,
Right.
which is really useful. If I use that in a bit later on. So in my update here, it's going to update the first contact record to change the name to Harry Potter from Rose Gonzalez, I think it was. And then if we run the query again, we will see that Harry Potter is now the first one in there. The first one seemed like a good idea, but I didn't realise how big my text would have to be to appear on this screen. So there's a little lesson for next time I do this talk. And it can also create metadata. So anyone use the SalesforceDX VS Code plugin? Yeah, so again, that's effectively what that's doing is that's just delegating off to SalesforceDX via some of the hooks that you've got into SalesforceDX. It can create loads of things. The ones that I use most of the time are an Apex class, Lightning component, Visual Force page. Typically, so it's different commands. So we've got force Apex class, force Lightning component, create. Typically, you're giving it a name, you're giving it the directory where you want it to go, and some things require a little bit more of additional information. I think the Visual Force page actually quite likes a label in there, which it seems like I might have missed. You'll notice on those commands there's no -use. So I'm not doing anything with my org. This is all happening on my local file system. Once it's there, it's entirely up to me to get that deployed again. So that's number 13. Create metadata. So I create myself a directory called newmd. And remember to hit return, so I put a weight in there. Then that does the force Apex class create. So I'll tell it which directory I want it to go into. newmd.parses. It figures out the whole name for that, creates the new class, and it creates the meta XML. So it creates everything I need in order to have a new Apex class. Same with the Lightning component. In Lightning components, you have quite a lot of scaffolding around it. It creates all of those, component, metadata, controller, helper, all of the good bits and pieces that you need. So it takes care of all of that. It knows that from a template. And finally, the same with the Visual Force pages. So again, it creates the page, creates the meta XML. And if I go and list the directory, you can see they've all ended up in the right place.
Can we have a quick look at that class exclusion?
Yeah.
Very quickly, sorry. Is it literally empty, or is it put some sort of stub in there?
It puts a stub in there. It's not completely empty, so you can save it as it is, you could immediately deploy it, but obviously all it's got is a constructor and a public with sharing. So it's kind of like you always used to get in the force.com IDE. If you created a new class on the server, it would immediately come down and it would have that information in there. So that's all pretty cool. So that does a lot of things that you can do in kind of existing tools, sometimes on the Salesforce UI. So there's not really any compelling reasons at this point in time as to why you might want to transition over to the Salesforce CLI, apart from the fact maybe it remembers your user names for you. Where it gets really powerful is scripting. Once you start introducing some business logic, you can put some conditionals in there, you can look at the output, you can figure out what you're going to do. Once you've got hold of that, that's when you're into a whole new different ballgame, and that's where the CLI, any CLI, really comes into its own. So for example, you can do things like chain commands, so I don't have to sit there at the command line and run both of them. So in this case, I'm going to deploy the code base, and then I'm going to run my tests as part of a single command. So first off, it executes the deployment, sits there and polls away for however many seconds until that's deployed. Get in there, 39. That seems to be able to do 39 at once. So unfortunately, I've got 40. There you go. So now it's done that, now I can immediately run through and execute my local tests and pull that on. So that's kind of quite a nice thing to be able to do. This is quite nice. I can process the output. So if I go back to my one of my report commands, I've got that in human readable. With most things I can then do --JSON. That gives me it as a massive JSON file. As soon as you go into --JSON, what's noticeable is how much more information you get. So the human readable aspect of this is actually kind of a relatively high level, whereas you've got an absolute ton of information there. So what I can do with that information is basically I can reformat that if I so desire. Once it's in JSON, I can easily go into a node script, something along those lines. I can report the results, or I can take some additional action depending on what's gone on there. So if I now go into my next directory, /node, good God. So what I'm doing here is I'm running the same command, getting the JSON output back, and then I'm just giving myself nice little snippets. I don't need to see loads and loads of information. I've done 0 of 16, 0 of 16, and now my deployment succeeded. So that's kind of, always think that's a little bit better. I can see at a glance what's going on there. But I can also, and I don't know if this is going to work actually, because given I'm in multi-screen mode, but we'll try this.
Can you show the JS file?
I can do, yeah. Let me fire this off and see if it does anything. I'm curious myself. Yay! I get a nice little notification up there telling me that it succeeded. So I only do that if it succeeded. If it failed, I get a big failed. Oh no! Something went horribly wrong. You happy with Vi?
Can you get out of it?
I was born in the command line. So there's actually a little bit of this. So it effectively fires off my sfdx command there. And I've got this subroutine called exec handle error, and what that does is that basically captures output or the error, regardless of where it comes out, and then parses the JSON and sends it back. So I execute it there, and then I go into this, and I go into a loop and basically say, while it's not succeeded or cancelled and failed, so while it's queued, I build out the message. If the status is queued, then I add to my message the number of components deployed from the JSON versus the number of components total, so I can see that kind of thing. And then once I've output that, I build the report command, and I execute that again, and I go back into the loop. And then in my slightly different version of this, you will see that I have a little OSA script call, which displays the notification with the status of what actually happened there. So that's pretty nice as well, not bad at all. However, this is where the real power is, orchestration. So So in this case, I can run multiple commands, and I can only proceed to the next command if the previous command was successful. So you can put in that kind of business logic and conditional functionality. So what my final script does is it clones my Git repo, it deploys it, and assuming it deployed successfully, it stores the commit ID of what's been deployed into the org, but only if it's committed successfully. So I need to jump out of that and go and prove that my commit ID is empty at the moment. I'm going to execute this one, so I've put in some breaks which I wouldn't normally have. That's then done my git clone, that's all coming okay. Press enter to deploy. That will then fire off the sfdx using my same script as before, with 39 this time, so it takes a bit longer. But it's nice that I can see it's easily going up. And then finally, because that was successful, I can update my commit ID. And that's now basically saying it's updated my custom setting record. They really enjoy that there. As you can see now here, I've got my version number has gone in there. So that's the version of the commit that I've checked out of Git and that I've deployed. So if at any point in time I wonder what's in that org, I can just go and look at Git and I can see what was in that commit ID. So I'm going to save that again. I'm going to run this again. This time I'm going to break it just to show that it doesn't continue on when there's any kind of an error. Right, so before I do the deployment, I go over here. I just put a load of gobbledygook in at the beginning of that file, switch back over to this one, press enter to deploy. That's now going off and in progress, and what we should see is a nice ton of error messages. There you go, so at that point in time my script has realised deployments have failed, I'm not updating the commit ID, we didn't actually push anything in there. So that's where the real power is to my mind. With orchestration you can kind of build out very automated deployments. As soon as things are ready, you can then hook it, you have something like a Git hook. You can be notified that something's ready to be deployed, and if your processes are set up such as that, you can then check it out, deploy it. You can then run all the unit tests and capture the result of the unit tests, capture the result of code coverage, tell loads of people about it. All of that from the command line. All things you can probably do from tools like Jenkins, etc. You can do all from the command line, and you can. It's easy, much easier to move it around from device to device. It's simply a shell script or a Node script. Definitely worth getting involved in Node if you're doing anything with this. It's much easier to process the output in JSON format. If you do that in Node, you can just do JSON.parse and then you've got an object and you can get all the information. You try and do that in something like a bash shell, which I did originally when I started playing around with the full CLI a couple of years ago. You will very quickly wish you were dead, I would say. There's a load more information about it. So there's a homepage for the CLI. There's a setup guide, which is part of the SalesforceDX setup guide. Even though it's not SalesforceDX, it's just a bit blurred at the moment. Command reference, there are loads of commands, I only really skimmed the surface. There's release notes there. And then there's a wise man did a blog series about using the Salesforce CLI as well. I'll leave you to deduce from the URL there who that wise man might have been. So that's it from me. Any questions?
So given all the power that gives you with the existing metadata API, what are the compelling arguments for the full fact of SalesforceDX? So
if we're going for scratch orgs, scratch orgs are good, I think, if you're doing application development, if you're doing package type development as an ISV, rather than, I don't think I wouldn't say it's great for customers at the moment. What I've been using it for is I wanted to try turning on the locker service on all my components and see if that worked. So I could quickly spin up a scratch org. I still deploy to the scratch org through the metadata API. I haven't been through the conversion. I could go through the conversion if I want. But effectively, where I use it a lot is around disposable orgs. So I'm basically just spinning up an org for a purpose, and that might be for a continuous integration and continuous testing type of thing. But for me, it's typically been, I'm going to fix a bunch of unit tests and I don't want to impact any of my other developer orgs, or I want to turn on a locker service and I don't want to break all my existing functionality. So I'll just create a disposable org, try it out, and then I can bin it off at the end when I'm done.
So it's like a sandbox for people that fear commitment.
There's an element of that, I think, yeah. And I think if you're working in the ISV world, you don't have sandboxes as a rule, yeah. So you've just got developer editions, and scratch orgs are way easier to set up and shape than developer editions. So if you want a large number of Apex line capability and you want advanced multi-currency, you don't have to contact support, and that gets you back about half a day of your life every time you're spinning up an edition, I find. Yes? No? Awesome. Thanks for listening. Thanks for coming.